Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ben Boland, the Deputy Dean of King's College, Dickson Poon School of Law at King's. And on behalf of the Bar Society, Dickson Poon School of Law and StopWatch, I'd like to welcome you for tonight's Stop and Search debate. A couple of people have said to me, perhaps some people who are not familiar with the field might just want one or two words about the origins of power. So I'm just going to say a few words before introducing the panel. The police power to stop and search was controversial as soon as it was passed in the Police and Criminal Evidence Act in 1984, replacing the much-hated sus law, which allowed a person to be arrested on the suspicion of being a rogue or a vagabond. And the power to stop and search was intended to be an intermediate power between the invidious choice of arresting somebody or doing nothing. It was the power to search somebody to allay suspicions a police officer might have without necessarily needing to arrest them. You'll hear the various sides of the debate as this evening unfolds. But recently the Home Secretary expressed her concern about stop and search. She said it's undoubtedly an important police power, but when misused it can be counterproductive, an enormous waste of time. When innocent people are stopped and searched, it can be an unacceptable affront to justice. So speakers will have their views on whether it's an important police power or an unacceptable affront to justice. Tonight's motion is the police power to stop and search does more harm than good. So, and by the end of the evening you will have formed your opinions on this, and at the end we will have a vote. So you will get to express your view on that motion. So, let me introduce this evening's panel. On the farthest to the left, Dwayne Brooks, who is the critical friend on stop and search for the Deputy Mayor. Next to him, give me 1 second. Is Anthony Ollenpickle, who is also known as Tony Supreme, a poet, creative writer and public speaker, and youth ambassador for the Safer London Foundation. Next up is Superintendent Darren Curtis, Detective Superintendent, with 26 years in the police service, the last 12 years in the current rank, and he is currently with the Metropolitan Police Stop and Search Unit. Jenny Jones is an ex-archaeologist and former chair of the Green Party. She's been a member of the London Assembly since 2000, and in 2004 she was named as one of 200 Women of Achievement, and in 2013 became a working peer in the House of Lords, taking the title of Baroness Jones of Mulsicombe. Stafford Scott is the founder of the Broadwater Farm Defence campaign in the 1980s and campaigned successfully for the release of the Tottenham 3. He is currently advocacy officer at the monitoring group and coordinator of Tottenham Rights. Courtney Griffiths QC has been involved in some of the most high-profile and notable cases in the past 2 decades, a wide-ranging role in international criminal law. Amongst the many roles that he's taken has been to defend the former president of Liberia, Charles Taylor, at The Hague. And last but not least, my colleague Leif Bernard, who's a professor in the Dickson Poon School of Law, who will chair this evening's debate. So if you join me in welcoming our speakers. Thank you.
Friends, this is an issue on which people have strong views, and we're looking forward to a forthright exchange of opinions. But here we are in a university, a place of learning, and the night will only be a success if we learn from each other. And that includes all of us up here learning from each other and from you also. The exchange between us, I think, will be the highlight of the the end, we'll come together and gather as a single house and together decide the judgment on the question, yea or nay. This house believes that stop and search does more harm than good. We'll start out the brief initial remarks with Superintendent Curtis.
Thank you. Stop and search is a good thing. It protects the public and tackles crime. In the 3 months from April to June in 2014, 350 weapons were recovered directly as a result of the use of stop and search. 284 knives and blades, 64 firearms and a number of other miscellaneous items. That's 350 opportunities to kill or seriously injure which have been removed. Of course, stop and search is intrusive, it's unpleasant. As a young man, I was subjected to search a number of times, far less than many, but it wasn't a nice thing. And I travel through airports from time to time, and I've been searched going through airports, and I'll tell you, I recognise it is deeply unpleasant. The critical thing is to ensure that we search the right people, and we not only do it the right way legally, but in a way that preserves the dignity of those that it's imposed upon. Our focus in the Met has been on attenuating the use of stop and search powers toward things that matter to the public of London, primarily weapons and criminality such as burglary, theft, motor vehicle theft. And moreover, to ensure that searching of individuals is better targeted. Searches in London since 2011-12 have reduced by around 60%, but at the same time, the arrest rate has doubled to close on 20%. And although I mention arrest, the very existence of stop and search powers reduces the likelihood of arrest. For where there's suspicion, without the power to stop and search to verify and validate, there is only one option that's left to the officer, the choice of arrest or not. Finally, I'll just say a thought. The public attitude survey demonstrates that 71% of the public in London actually support the use of stop and search powers, and a similar percentage believe that the police are doing it effectively. In my opinion, stop and search is a power for good. Thank you.
No.
Good evening. Okay, we'll start again. Good evening.
Good evening.
This evening, I'm going to be with the Met, and I'm against the House. Because as far as I'm concerned, stop and search is a tool that the Met needs to keep each and every one of us safe on the streets of London. It's as simple as that. Tonight we'll hear about the good bits and also the bad bits, but at the end of the day, if your child gets caught in crossfire because two gangsters are on the road shooting at each other, you would want to know why that gun was on the street. And it's as simple as that. So let's hope we can have a great debate and you can all side with me and be against the House. Thank you.
For the motion. 1. Stop and search's major criteria is race, racial profiling. 2. It does not assist in the investigation of serious crime. To mention the recovery of 350 weapons ignores the fact that in order to identify those 350 weapons, how many hundreds of thousands of people going about their normal business were bluntly interfered with by the police? And the fact is that the vast majority of stops and search do not result in an arrest for anything serious. So in terms of the investigation of serious crime, it doesn't work. Because the majority of those who are stopped and searched guess what's found? Small quantities of drugs. That is the major result of a stop, and most of the arrests are for that. And what's the price that's paid for that minuscule success rate? The alienation of whole communities. How would you feel as a parent when your child on his way home from school has been frisked and rubbed down by a police officer in public? You would be outraged, wouldn't you? So that when you look at the figures for those who are stopped, add on to that the figures of the parents, relatives, and friends who are consequently alienated as a result of that. Because my third point is this, that the power to stop and search is more to do with control, the appearance of power, and ruling the streets. That's why the police want to keep it. It projects their power in a very immediate sense onto the street. So that although lowering crime rates is declared to be the primary purpose, the latent purpose is best assessed by the results of who gets stopped disproportionately. Right now, blacks, historically always the case, and people of a certain appearance who are deemed to be potential terrorists.
Oh, sorry.
I mean, following on from what Poon is saying, as far as I'm concerned, I'm an activist that comes from Tottenham, and we've been being stopped and searched ever since they removed away the SOS law. The SOS laws are what led to the uprisings in Dickson in 1981, and the moment we campaigned and got that removed, they brought in stop and search. And stop and search, to be honest, is used as a blunt weapon to cudgel our community on a day-to-day basis. What I don't think the Chief Superintendent understands when he shouts out those figures so proudly, and I actually refute those figures personally, but when he says those figures, what he doesn't understand is this. In my community, the first thing I ever got arrested for, sent to prison for, criminalised for, was a charge of SOS. And the crime didn't even happen, much less that they got the wrong suspect. There are lots of people in my community who have had that exact same experience, can prove it. Because when they did away with SOS, they closed down the detention centres that they used to push us into and farm us off into. And what everyone needs to understand about stop and search, you do not have to stop and search my son 200 times like I might have been stopped and searched 200 times. You need one bad interaction with my son for my reality to become his reality, for our reality to become bind. And that's why there's such resistance in our community against stop and search, because we know they're used disproportionately. And what they're telling us now is, we'll cut down the numbers. It's smoke and mirrors. If you reduce the amount of stops and search you do by 50%, then the ratio of arrests are going to appear as if they've grown, but they haven't. It's still 1 in 10. They're going to tell you about the use of intelligence, stop and search, to lull you into some false sense of security, that they're doing something scientific. But the truth is police officers in the Metropolitan Police Service today cannot tell the difference between one black face and another. So if I commit a crime, these two good men who are talking against the motion, they're likely to be stopped and searched, just as much as I'm actually likely to be stopped and searched. This was proven a long time ago. We hoped that when they got black officers in the police force, it would help them to be able to tell the difference between us. Unfortunately, they can't tell the difference between us and the black officers, but they still stop and search them and harass them and charge them and do all kinds of things to them. I say it does much more harm than good.
Good evening. As a Green Party politician, I don't often agree with Conservative politicians, but I do agree with Theresa May on this occasion that stop and search is an affront to justice. Now, I've been working on policing since 2000. I was on the London Assembly and then on the Metropolitan Police Authority, and the Police Authority was not there to tell the police what to do, as the police kept telling us, but we were there to keep an eye on them and to make sure that they were acting with probity and and correctly. And quite honestly, from the very beginning, I was talking about stop and search and saying, you are doing too much and you're doing it wrongly. And I said that for 12 years before we got a new Met Commissioner, Bernard Hogan-Howe, who, to his credit, has reduced the amount of stop and search. He said yesterday, I now sit on a police and crime committee at City Hall, and we keep an eye on the police as before. He said yesterday that over the course of a year, the Met carries out over 320,000 stop and searches, or stops and searches. This means that every hour, at least 35 Londoners are stopped and searched. A further 241,000 people are asked to stop and account for their actions. Now, I am never stopped by the police. And my partner, who is a sort of conventionally dressed white man, is never stopped by the police. It is disproportionately on the black community, and usually the young black male community, that stop and search falls on. And to me, that is an injustice. I don't care how many times the police tell me it's not racially motivated and it's all intelligence driven. That is absolute garbage. We know, and we've known forever, that it's all about the quality of the search, because quite honestly, if somebody is stopped politely and it's explained to them why it's happening, we think that there's some weapons, being used. Tell me if I'm wrong. But still, the Met stops and searches very badly, and this alienates communities.
Good evening. So, growing up, I had a negative view of the police because of the social stigma attached to them by my peers and others. The idea that the police force were driven by institutional racism and prejudice was simply a theory taken from what others had told me from their experiences. However, my first experience of dealing with the police was through a stop and search. I remember being in year 10, I was about 15, and I was approached by two officers. I was on work experience, so I was actually wearing a suit, and they stopped us and said that we fit the description of two guys who had stolen my phone. At the time, I was nervous, I felt cornered, and believe it or not, I almost felt like I actually committed the crime, which I didn't. However, when I sit back, as an older person now, when I think about stop and search, I understand the reasoning behind it. I understand the potential greatness that it can be, that it can have for our community. I also understand your position in the fact that it isn't done in the way it should be done. However, the potential for stop and search, I think, can be great. So my position is against the House, and we'll obviously highlight the positives of it during the debate. Thank you.
So strong views on our side. One big difference that seems to be coming out is, of course, what are the benefits of this technique outweigh the costs. We've had both the benefits and the costs highlighted. Just on the benefits side, there's been a claim made that stop and search is an effective, maybe a necessary, policing technique, and that it does, in fact, help to protect and prevent serious crimes like people being caught in the crossfire when gangsters are shooting around. Is that a point of contention about simply the benefits? Simply focusing on stop and search as a policing technique to detect and prevent serious crimes? Does anyone want to take that up as a follow-on? Superintendent, you thought it was quite useful.
Well, I clearly do. As a junior officer, I exercise stop and search, and I do really get how unpleasant it is. I'm not naive. I'm an individual. I haven't been stopped in any way at the level of frequency that some people have. And clearly, we're not getting it right all the time. But having been there and taken serious weapons away, and I do take the point that perhaps, in the scheme of things, you might say an item of property isn't serious crime. But actually, someone walking around the streets of London with a firearm is very serious. I've taken a firearm off someone. I've got colleagues that have taken firearms off of people. Do you want a society where people walk around the streets with firearms? It's a very simple question. You know? And yes, the proportion of firearms at seized may actually seem like a small number in the scheme of things. But how many firearms do you want in London being carried?
I mean, you say that you understand, but I'm sorry, sir, I don't think you do understand. Because you stood up a few moments ago and you said that you'd been for an airport and you'd been stopped and searched and you understood what it was like. Everybody who goes for an airport is asked politely to remove certain items. We all do. If you think that you can compare that to being stopped and searched in the streets of Tottenham by a van load of TSG police officers who have just come from hearing something about some black youth having done something, then you don't have a clue about the experience that we go through, sir.
That's really not what I was trying to say. What I was saying
I
is
didn't
when
interrupt. I waited to get to my point. I mean, I'm saying to you that to compare means you do not understand. We've seen people stripped in the streets. We see the same kids. What the young people are saying to me now, post this great cutting of the numbers of stop and search. And let me tell you again why they do it. Because the Met speaks from both sides of its mouth at the same time. Let me tell you how they managed to do it. They said to the officers, it's no longer in your PPI. It's no longer a performance indicator, the number of stops and searches you go out there and do. And when they use that as a performance indicator, this is how it was. The early shift came on, it was a performance indicator. They saw somebody like me, they stopped me. The midday shift come on is a performance indicator. They saw someone like me, they stopped me. The evening shift come on is a performance indicator. They see somebody like me, they stop me. Now they've reduced that. Now they say that the performance is around the amount of successful outcomes that police officers achieve. So they haven't reduced it by using any kind of scientific means. What they've actually done is finally reined in their officers. And if they felt that it was a necessary procedure, why is it that they felt the need to rein in their officers? Let's have an honest and frank discussion, please.
I think Mr. Curtis gave a figure of something like 340 weapons that had been picked up. But of course, people carry weapons for all sorts of reasons. It's not necessarily to attack someone else. And I know people who carry knives because they are frightened for themselves. They don't intend to use them unless they're attacked. And there's also the fact that, talking about, I don't know how many guns you've picked up from stop and search, but actually traffic officers occasionally stop illegal vehicles and they get hauls of weapons from those stops. Personally, I think we should do more traffic stops. We'd probably get more criminals that way. It seems to me that every single argument for stop and search comes up against this wall of the fact that it is discriminatory, it alienates community, it means you get less information from those communities because they don't trust the police anymore. And the police rely on community information for, drugs busts and other criminal activities. It is a disaster.
Detective Superintendent, just 2 points. Your reliance on this figure of 350 weapons recovered, set that against the 320,000 people who actually stopped. And let's look at the statistics from a different viewpoint. It means that over 500,000 citizens were stopped on our streets and searched when they'd committed not a single criminal offence. Don't you regard it as being disproportionate? And the fact is, not one serious offence, such as murder or a terrorist offence, has been halted as a result of the police having those powers. And the other thing you've got to ask as well is this. If this is a perfectly neutral power which is given to the police, how is it that every single country which has a non-white population, guess what, you go to Berlin, who's most likely to be stopped, searched, arrested and incarcerated? A Turk. You go to the United States, who is the most likely to be stopped and frisked? There are major problems in the States now because of that. Blacks and Hispanics. You go to France, who is the most likely to be stopped, searched, arrested, and imprisoned. If you're Algerian or you're black, is that pure coincidence? And what does that tell us about the nature of policing globally and what policing at the end of the day is actually about? Containing certain socio-economic and other pressures within a society at the lowest level of that society, which is the poor, and which, because of their economic situation, predominantly blacks. That's the bottom line on it, surely.
There's a couple of points that I would like to deal with on the progressive side of the bench. Now, this debate, we have to heat it up a bit more. Every single London borough should have a stop and search monitoring. So individuals like you and myself can monitor, stop and search anytime, any day of the week or year. So if there are issues with stop and search around racial profiling, then shouldn't those local monitoring groups see that? The figures are there for everybody to see. They're not hidden. They're available. Now, I want to talk about disproportionality. Up until a few years ago, the figures were always based on the 2001 census. So we were basing our stop and searches on the demographics of figures that were 11, 12 years old. Isn't that just nonsense? How are we basing facts on figures that are a decade old? In Lewisham, we had an issue around disproportionality. But I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure out why young black men were 6 times more likely to be stopped in Lewisham. So I asked the Met in Lewisham to do a bit of work for me. So what we did was we broke down Lewisham into postcodes, and I looked at all the stops at different times in the day. So between 4 and 7, there was a huge number of young black boys that were being stopped. The school population in Lewisham is 65% black. So a lot of these youngsters are people coming out of school and colleges. After that, it tells right down. Between the hours of 9 and 2 o'clock in the morning, it's mainly white people being stopped. But what I found also, which was interesting, was that whenever a white officer stopped a black person, they had to fill out the form. So there's a record. Whenever they stopped a white person, it was a conversation. And once that conversation was over, the slip wasn't filled out. So one officer could have stopped 5 white men during the night, 2 black people early in the evening, but he's only putting those 2 slips because as far as he's concerned, there might be a comeback. Maybe because of the way he's conducted stop and search. I don't know. But he's put that slip in because he's worried about the comeback. But he hasn't put the slip in for the 5 other white guys he stopped. Now that's a fact. The Met have recently accepted that. Now when you put that into the mix, you have to ask yourself, is it correct and is it factual for someone to say you're 7 times more likely to be stopped when we know the police are not doing the right job around stop slips? Well,
I'd really like to open up to the audience. Would you like to say anything before?
Yeah, I wanted to say I've worked in schools youth clubs and I've spoken to young people about the issue of stop and searches. And when we sort of break it down and go through the reasons why stop and searches are being implemented, they understand it and they understand the need for it. Again, they do share their experiences with me, and I do empathise with them as well, because I've been through some of the same things. Young black men are often targeted. Well, that's a fact, we know that. However, it's still, stop and searches do still keep the community safe in a way, because if police are there, there is that feel that safety is there as well. Once police are in the area, you'll feel safer, you feel like, if there is someone carrying something, they're going to be found, they're going to be stopped, they're going to be searched and arrested for what they're carrying. Young people understand that, so as much as we do complain, there is an understanding of why stop and search is necessary.
Thanks so much. We'd like to open up the discussion now. If you would please say your name when you start. If you have an institutional affiliation you'd like to mention, please feel free. And if you would limit yourself to one question or comment, please.
My name is Paul Lawrence from the Basketball Education Association. My question is for the Superintendent. Having heard, various conversations on this, including the one that we're now having, it occurs to me that what we should really be discussing is how we discipline or alter behavior of police officers who abuse this useful tool and have brought it into disrepute. Because I don't think anyone, including those against it, would say it's not a useful tool, but it is an application. And that is what the Met needs to do to obtain the confidence of people like myself. How do you alter behavior of those officers who have brought a useful tool in disrepute?
The first thing I'd say in response to that is I've sat here and, I stand here and I make a presentation around something and I speak from my heart. And I use statistics and I use things to illustrate. But actually, when I hear people's bad experiences, I feel really hurt. I feel hurt because I'm an individual. I'm not wearing a uniform, am I? But I'm an individual and I'm also a police officer. And any affront to my rights as an individual and people that I get on with, and I've got a broad sort of circle of friends from very many backgrounds. Anything that I hear about how police officers undermine that trust, I find really personally hurtful. And you're absolutely right. Police officers that don't know how to behave, don't treat people as individuals, actually corrupt what I think is a useful power, have to be dealt with. So there are a number of mechanisms. You can take your view, and I suspect that some people think they're not effective enough. But people that are routinely searching individuals, the number and nature of the searches are looked at, they're picked up in a variety of performance meetings, not least in the monitoring groups. There are challenges made by senior members of the management team around what they're doing. So at the top end, there's attempts to change behaviour. You've got to remember the Met is over 30,000 police officers. So trying to change a culture is actually a difficult thing that you're fighting all the time, to get people to behave in a different way. And just the same way as any one of you learns by the experiences that you're with, if you're not getting the right experiences alongside you, you have potentially good officers that don't behave the way that you'd always want them to. I've been doing this for 26 years. I'd like to think along the way I've learned and I've mellowed. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got people that are very much broadly the age group here, who aren't necessarily going to have what I hope some wisdom, some age brings towards wisdom. It is an ongoing thing. We were talking just before we started about opportunities to do experiential training. to actually really sort of focus on how people are behaving. I think the Body 1 video that's being trialled across the Met, and the Commissioner's indicates going to be rolled out, will have a very big implication on stop and search. Not least because it will give the ability to lifetime review. And actually, when you're dealing with individuals who come to notice on a number of occasions for the way that they deal with stop and search, actually be able to review that live and take more direct action. So I think there's a number of things that are in play. There's also a raft of training that's going on to change behaviours, to remove to better understand how stereotypes can influence the way people behave. But it is going to be a slow process.
I think we're in danger oftentimes with these debates when we talk in terms of training, of individualizing what is an institutional problem. Given the numbers involved, the idea that you can change the behavior of individual officers totally ignores the fact that as an institution, and it has to be at an institutional level, given the disparities, policing tends to be focused on certain groups. Now, as an institution, how do you propose addressing that?
A number of years ago, the Metropolitan Police was labelled institutionally racist. You take a view. I was part of the Metropolitan Police at the time, and I think it was a bitter pill to swallow, because the first thing that happens when you're accused of something is you go into defence mode. You know, that's what you do. But anyone that says that the Met is the same place that it was those years ago is mistaken. It's changed, and it's changed a lot. I would be a liar if I stood here and said it was perfect, or it didn't have any way to go. Of course it's got a long way to go, and it always will, because that's the nature of dynamic society and an organisation. But it has changed.
You said earlier on you've been a police officer for 26 years, sir. I've been blackening this skin for 55 years. I've heard commissioner after commissioner after commissioner, commander after commander after commander saying exactly what he's saying. And we're still where we're at. We're still where we're at. I see that there is a bit of a change, because nowadays you get a few young black people to come and support what you're saying. But I remember the history. No, Wayne's still young. I'm not disrespecting him. I remember the history of this. Right, so Wayne will talk about these monitoring groups and try to convince you all that don't worry, we're out there watching you. I went to one of these monitoring groups. They have no power whatsoever. They cannot do anything independently of what they're being told to do by democracy. They don't have no budget. There's no individuality. And let me tell you what the monitoring groups replaced. They replaced the community consultative groups, where we could go and we'd have local authorities cheering these groups, and we could capture the patterns of what was happening on the streets, so we could identify the officers. So they've taken it away from us, and they've given us this monitoring group that's all about statistics, and all of the statistics are given by the police. There's no engagement with the community, there's no involvement with the community, and there's no speaking to the community. And it just goes into statistics that I just can't believe. Maybe it's just the boys in Tottenham that they don't give these receipts to. But there's no stopping accounting in Tottenham. And there's no stopping accounting to the boys that they say are gangs. They don't go out there and have these conversations with them. And this thing about white people being stopped between certain hours, give us some numbers. Because still, even if the white people are being stopped at certain hours, they're still disproportionate. And you're talking about school kids being stopped and searched all the time. Why are they stopping and searching those little youngsters and criminalising these kids and turning them against policing at such a young age? And what are you going to do about it? The gentleman up there asked, what do you do when they get it wrong? We know that recently you did your own survey that showed lots of officers didn't even feel the reasonable cause that they had for suspecting people and stopping and searching them. What have you done to those officers? Have you told those officers that they're no longer allowed to go out there and stop and search? Of course you haven't, because they're still out there and they're still doing it, my friend.
Mr. Brooks said that recording is dubious. That is absolutely true. A lot of police officers don't record record properly. And he also talked about the stop and search monitoring groups. I actually asked the Deputy Mayor for Poon yesterday at a public meeting about these groups, and he had to admit their performance was very variable. Now, if you don't fund a group, if you don't give them training, if you don't give them encouragement and guidelines, they are not going to be able to do the job very well. Some are fantastic and they do the job brilliantly, but some just can't. They just can't. And on the training, I went out to Hendon and saw the training that the Met gives officers, and I've got to say it was pretty good actually. I'm a real critic, but I thought it was pretty good. But out on the streets, it's different. And I did a report, I talked to a lot of young people about this, and they said what they would like to do is to have interaction with the police officers to explain to them how awful it feels to be stopped and searched. And yet the Met Police don't do that anymore. It used to be funded by charities and so on, but the Met Police have cut back so much they don't do it, except if you have a prolific stopper. If you have an officer that does a lot of stops and searches, they will actually bring him in with some young people to hear how they feel about it. You know, it's all so awful that I just think the damage is done with black communities now, and also, you know, poor white communities too. The damage is done, and the Met shouldn't have this power. It's too much power, and they're not using it properly.
A lot of people you want to get in. The gentleman here with the apple.
Okay, I'm Mark Bondi, a foreign exchange student here at King's College. From where I come from, the issue of stop and search is considered more from the point of civil liberties than from the point of racial discrimination. Precisely because diversity doesn't play much of a role in society where I people. So then, and my question is addressed to those who are in favor of the motion of the House. In case police diversity was reached, so let's assume that perhaps by considering population and data and having fixed quotas, especially in boroughs that need so I'd say black officers working in predominantly black neighborhoods. Would you be considering the possibility of, you know, placing yourself on the other side, let's say, be in favor of stop and search if this was the case, if police diversity was actually achieved?
No.
No.
The New York Police Department has a large number of black officers. Has it made a difference in terms of blacks and Hispanics being stopped in New York? More blacks and Hispanics are stopped in New York City than actually live in that city. And yet, it is a police force, as with the Los Angeles LAPD, which has a large numbers of black and non-white officers. And what we've got to understand is the purpose of policing and why changing the color of the policeman doesn't change the purpose of policemen and its focus. And you know what the focus is when you look at the outcomes. Who gets stopped, who gets arrested, and so on. And it's the same in all of these places, irrespective of the composition of the police force.
Now, I would say, crap tastes like crap. It doesn't matter what colour the crap is, it's still crap. Black officers, it doesn't make no difference to me who abuses my civil liberties, who abuses my rights, whether that person be black or white. Black officers sometimes are even worse than their white counterparts because they're trying to prove to their white counterparts that they're just the same as them. They're required sometimes to prove to their white counterparts that they're just the same as them. We're talking about institutionalized racism. We're talking about the power structure. I don't see black officers. Once they get into a uniform, they're all good. They all behave the same, and they all cover up for each other in exactly the same way.
Can I quickly just get a show of hands in the room? Who knows how to complain if you've got an issue with stop and search? All right, so there's not that many people. So can you not see why the issue perpetuates? If we have issues with stop and search, we should be reporting them, and therefore something should be done about them.
Who do you report it to? Who do you report it to?
And who's going to do something about it?
Don't you
wait,
report
the
it to
point-
the police?
Didn't the toothless IPCC just come out with a report that says that actually the Metropolitan Police Service doesn't handle complaints by black people well?
I know that.
We
I've
don't
been on
complain
a-
to
I've-
police about police. We
I
don't
know
do
that. I know that because I've been in a youth engagement program with the IPCC, and I advised them with what we were speaking about, and I said to them, obviously, there's something that needs to be done in terms of the complaint system, because complaints are not being dealt with. Obviously, that is something for the Met to deal with. However, what I'm saying is, once that is done, if people don't complain anyway. That's my point.
Because historically, complaining to the police about the police is a waste of time, and all it gets you is more stops and searches later on down the line.
Please give your name.
I'm Carol Atkinson. I chair the community monitoring group, which is very effective in the Richmond upon Thames, and I'm vice chair of Pan London. Stop and search is with us at the moment. I believe it should carry on, but it should be done with respect on both sides. So if we've got it, then we should make it work. And the way to make it work is to use your community monitoring groups. So if you come from a London borough and you're prepared to give me your email, I will see that you can become a member of that group. You'll be privy to information, what's written on the 5090s. It's anonymised. What the police officer actually writes for his grounds to stop. You can see if the grounds are appropriate. You can see if the outcomes are appropriate. And you can have an opportunity to influence what goes on. And I think there's a huge resource here of young people who are obviously very passionate about stop and search, as I am. Let's get it done properly. Join your community monitoring group and make it
Move out
work.
Tottenham and move to Richmond.
There is one other thing, that's worthy of saying, in terms of, sort of seeing how things go, because we've talked about all sorts of opinions here. Any one of you who's over the age of 18 can apply to come out and spend time with the police watching what's going on. Watching what's going on will give you a real feel, not only for whether people are doing things in the right way and fairly, but also identifying why things are taking place and some of the interactions that police have. So, you have to take a side in a debate like this, but I would just urge you to take your opportunity, irrespective of what side you come down on now. Take the opportunity to come out with the police and see what's happening and why it's happening, and then take a properly informed view.
Darren, I've worked as a criminal defence barrister for 34 years now. And you'll recall that about 20 years ago, you were the senior investigating officer in a case I defended. And you kind of reminded me of that when we arrived this evening. Now, I have to say, I totally understand how difficult the job of a policeman is. I'll be quite frank and blunt with you. When I came into this job, as far as I was concerned, all coppers were bastards. Over the years, I've come to realise that the vast majority of policemen do a very difficult job, and they do it extremely well. And I've seen that both from the viewpoint of a defence advocate and from sitting as a part-time judge in the Crown Court. So let's not understand that my position is anti-police. It's not at all. What I'm saying is that not only at a top level, but you guys have to ensure that when then officers go out on the street, they know there is a consequence if they misuse the powers they have. At present, they feel immune from any kind of stricture of that nature. And so it's your job to ensure that that is put in place.
We have a lot of questions, I'm afraid, so we're going to have to start going to something like a lightning round. I'm going to take 2 questions at a time, if we could keep our answers a little bit briefer. The gentleman there had one, and then lady there. Please say your name.
Dr. Perry Spencer from Monash University. I think both sides of the debate are overrating their positions. Having said that, I have more sympathy for Stafford Scott's position and Mr. Bush's position than my colleague in the service. I think both sides of the argument are overstating the position. The notion that
1980s. I've lived in Tottenham, and I'm from South Hackney, and I still this place where young people have never been stopped and searched by the police, and that has to be said. And there are instant people researching why they're not been stopped and searched by the police compared to those who are disproportionately the target of police attention. So I think we need to qualify that normal black youngsters have that experience. However, in the environment where evidence-based policing seems to be the mantra, the use of stop and search, giving the data, and sharing is a complete failure. When we think of the numbers of people who stop, let's say only 10% of those people who stop and search are subject to bad behaviour. I've seen police officers be disrespectful to people, their families, treat them in appalling ways. And we weigh out the cost, the benefits. I'm not quite convinced that we have it right.
All right. So, thank you very much.
Jill Russell from the War Studies Department here. I'm usually focused on things like counterinsurgency. Please don't. Thank you. This month, at the start of this year, there has been here in London a number of violent crimes, I believe predominantly against young black men. And if I understand something of the history of stop and search, especially in London, a lot of it, or some of it, some part of it at least, goes to the knife crime, which seems to be committed by one demographic against the same demographic. What if, just from the negative side and also from the positive side, what if the tactic were tweaked? And instead of targeting the doer, it targets the victim, and it becomes stop and smile. And you walk up to young people on the street, you hand them your card, you have a conversation, you tell them, I'm concerned about drugs on the street, I'm concerned about crime, I'm concerned about violence towards kids just like you. If you know anybody who's facing any violence, if you have any information, if you know someone who wants to talk to a police officer, here's my card, please feel free to call me, you have a good day. Now, in the course of that conversation, the police officer can assess up what they think about that person, whether something else needs to be done, but the interaction becomes positive, and it becomes not, I think you're a bad guy, it's, I care about you, and I want to make sure you're safe. Would just a minor tweak like that, which still gives the police the opportunity to interact with people, would that change how it's perceived by the community?
Can I say we've done that in Lucia. Officers were giving out lots of information, trying to engage with people, and it just didn't work. What we also did was when we used to have quite a few number of Section 60, and what I used to do is I would broadcast that on my BlackBerry to young people in Lucian, and what would happen is when the police went to stop them, they would know why they're being stopped, they'd stand up, be searched, no complaints, no issues. The funny thing is that the police were complaining about it because they were saying that they didn't want the young people to know they were being stopped, that they would be stopped. But the positive side to that is when the gang members were being monitored and they got the message that there was a Section 60, they went and hid their weapons and the police were able to get weapons off the street, which is a good thing. But to answer your question, Mr. Lawrence, the Met can't do it by themselves. And that's why we still have the problem, because we don't engage enough. If there's an issue in your borough on stop and search, you've got to engage. Standing on the sideline, nothing changes, same old crap, ain't going to change nothing. And where I'm coming from is after the Macpherson inquiry, the police were beating the shit out of me every month. That's where I'm coming from. I was the most stopped black individual in Britain. That's where I'm coming from. The facts are there, Mr. Scott. The facts are there. Ken Livingston in 2001 had an inquiry into why I'd been stopped so much by the Met. The facts are there. The facts are there. So if I'm coming from that side and I'm saying to you, we need progression, then why do we still want to stay back in the past? We shouldn't be talking about stop and search in 10 years' time. But if we keep saying it's only black people, nothing will change, guess what? Nothing will change.
I think coming from a young person's viewpoint, I think that your idea, in theory, it would be excellent. However, knowing how young people are and the stigma that there is towards police, I don't quite see it happening so soon also.
Maybe not soon, but over time. These things, you'd have to have a change.
It would be something that you would have to try out. But I think, just briefly to sum up, I think literally just the interaction between an officer and a young person, just change that. Maybe not in the way that you're saying, but simply a greeting and a reason, and then implementing the stop and search. Just a simple change in communication.
People will refer to knife crime and who is actually stabbing who, and yes, it's an absolute reality. But if you go back to the roots of the problem, my community is not a lawless, criminal community that just wants to go and do this. My community, over years, yeah, I'm old school, I'm still alive, so I'm still telling our story, and as a result of what happened to us, our community started to take business into our own hands. Because even if we went to the police to tell them that we had a problem, invariably we'll be the ones who end up in a police cell. And let me tell you all this, 6 weeks ago I got stopped and searched. A police officer, someone said something about me to a police officer, immediately she's coming to me, she's reaching for handcuffs, she's putting her hands on me, stop. So I say, don't put your hands on me. Instantly, I'm arrested and charged with assault. I'm banged up in a police station for 10 hours. That isn't historic. This happened 6 weeks ago. They said NFA to me. I said, NFA, what does that mean? They said, no further action. I said, even that you've got wrong. Because yes, there will be further action. And no, I will not go to the police and complain about the police, because even when I got arrested, I phoned his mate, Matt Christie, who's someone that I work with in the community, to say, Matt, look what's happening to me. Matt said, Staff, I'll make sure you get A-class service. They kept me there for 10 hours and then later on told me, oh, you know what, mate, you fell through the gap. And finally, let me say what the police officer said. On camera, when asked what, they said, that's the white perpetrator, why have you got the black guy in handcuffs? Now, she said I assaulted her. This is her answer on camera. This is what they're going to pay for. On camera, because he's bigger than us. And in her statement, it said, big, black, and stocky. Right? The problem is that in the eyes of the law, black people, we increase in size when they have to come and speak to us. If I got any something in my hand, they'll think it's a gun. It's all about racial profiling and institutional racism. Once we work with that, then we can start to listen to what the gentlemen on this side are saying. But first of all, we have to work with that and eradicate that before any of these kinds of solutions will ever be possible in our community.
I have to go to the question. The lady in the white, gentleman.
It seems we're being asked to weigh the pros and cons here. And statistically, we know that the damage that has been done to communities is demonstrable. We've had Scotland, we've had McPherson, we've had regional riots. We know stop and search is doing damage. Is there not an onus now on the police and perhaps the academy and the researchers who have worked so hard to demonstrate that there is a problem to follow the police and track what the good side of stop and search is? We don't know how many arrests it avoids. We don't know how, what the good side of it. Why aren't we investigating now the right side of stop and search in regards to what works available?
Thank you very much.
I have a question for the Detective Superintendent. You mentioned two things about the police that I think are equally applicable to the communities that the police are stopping and searching predominantly. The first one was trying to change the culture is a very hard thing, what you said about the police. And the second one was when the police are accused of something, they instantly go into defence mode.
I think that I was saying about human nature.
So do you not then understand why these communities feel the way that they do, and perhaps why these communities are the ones that are, carrying weapons, carrying knives? Because for this long period of time, they have been in defence mode from the police.
Well, I'll answer your question. Because I am not the person that's experiencing it in that way, it would be churlish for me to turn around and say, I understand it from an insider's point of view. I think your point is incredibly well made, though. You're absolutely right. As someone that's trying to think this through, of course I kind of get why it's deeply offensive to communities. and particular communities because of the long history. But that doesn't mean to say that you shouldn't work something through, and it doesn't mean to say that you shouldn't change, and it doesn't mean to say that I shouldn't listen to some of the challenges that have been put to me right now and look at doing things differently. And just picking up, sorry, on your point earlier, Middlesex, we've just engaged in a project with Middlesex University exactly to look at some of the issues around stop and search.
I think now that so much damage has been done, and it's not just to the wider community, but it's actually to a whole stratum, which is young black people in particular. And when I've been out talking to groups and going to schools and that sort of thing, they don't say, as Mr. O'Leary Peckham said, that they feel safer if they see the police. They actually don't feel... Okay. Kids don't feel safer if they see the police. They immediately think, what are they going to do to me? And I also ask every group I met, how many of you would report a crime, like having a mobile phone stolen, that sort of thing? How many of you wouldn't report it? And they all put their hands up. So loads of crime is going unrecorded because kids don't trust the police. They say, I don't want them to notice me. I'm not going to go to them. Why should I? So we've done the damage. And Stafford and I were comparing notes on our arrests, and he got locked up for 10 hours and was manacled and wasn't given any food and that sort of thing. I was arrested last year. I was de-arrested after 3 minutes. That's racist.
We have time for one last question, I'm afraid.
Just one point on that.
We'll go through it.
If you go to the Central Criminal Court on any given day, there are 18 courts, and I promise you, at least a dozen of those courts will involve murder trials involving young black men killing each other. So I know about that statistic. But the bottom line is this: the use of stop and search has no evidential value whatsoever so far as those trials are concerned. Most of those trials nowadays at the Old Bailey depend on two things: telephone evidence and CCTV evidence. That's it. Stop and search plays no part whatsoever in preventing the commission of those crimes.
Sorry, so many people would like to ask a question. We have time for one more question. And then I'm just going to ask a last point. I'll give you opportunity, 30 seconds at most. We'll just go down at the last point, and then we'll have our vote on the motion of the House.
So my name is Nick Eastwood, and I'm Executive Director of Release. We are a drugs charity, and I just think, again, tonight what we've seen around stop and search, and I thank the panel for the contributions, is the debate moving into it's about knives and it's about guns. The reality is less than 1% of all stop and searches are around firearms, less than 10% are for knives. That's actually going down in relation to the new stats that we're getting from the Met. It's all about low-level possession of drugs.
Yeah.
It's about possession of cannabis. It's not about drug dealing even, and that's been identified by the HMIC. So if we're talking about cost and benefit, is that where we want police resources focused on? Is that worth the damage that we are doing to communities? Clearly not. And in terms of what you said, Superintendent, around what you could do in terms of changing the environment, you could do that by deprioritising the policing of low-level possession of drugs, and you could fundamentally change the basic policing with that decision.
You can answer the question.
Just kidding. Get up. Coming back to your point, it's, I accuse the police of lazy policing because in some boroughs, 65% of their stops are for drugs. That's the ground given. And when you go down deeper and you look at what the priorities are, the top 3 priorities are, some of them don't even include drugs. But in places where the priorities are drugs, then that's what the public is asking the police to do. And you can't argue with that at the end of the day. It's very difficult to prove a negative. It's easy to say, well, what has stop and search prevented? It's very hard to prove that. In Lucian, when I broadcast the fact when we were having Section 60s, we know people went and hid weapons. We don't know what we prevented, but we know they went and hid weapons. and I went out with the police, and the comment that was thrown out to you guys is, you know, how can you make a decision and you haven't been out and seen it for yourself? That's got to be in your minds now. Can you base your decision on what we said? Can you base your decision on what you heard your friends say? I don't think so. I think the only way you can base your decision on whether you support the motion or you don't, which I think you should, but is if you go out. You can go to any police station in London and say you want to go out with a response team or stop and search, anything, and it will be facilitated. If it isn't, call me, and I will come and make sure it is facilitated, because we are the people that are responsible for ensuring that the police do what they're supposed to do on our streets. It's down to us. If we don't complain, if we don't check their processes and their policies, nothing will change.
Getting on the low-level drug use point before we have.
Should be legalised. Green Party.
I'm certainly not going to get into any opinion on what should be legalised or not. It will take me a long way from here. No, seriously though. I mean, the police are there to enforce the laws as they are. It's very clear that the emphasis has changed. In terms of targeting, in terms of what the objectives of stop and search are, they're far from stopping lots of people for drugs. It is about weapons. It is about stolen property. And the shape and nature of stop and search is changing. But it'll take time. It's as simple as that.
What I'm about to say, it seems like I should be sitting on that side, but I'm not. Based on just experience, the whole stop and search thing, it is about drugs as well, a lot more so than it is about knives. When police do stop and search young people, they often say, you know, they're looking for the drugs, and that's kind of the facts. But I agree with what you're saying in terms of that needs to be changed. The focus needs to be changed, and it's not a focus on drugs and knives and guns, but a focus on actual like risk and who. You know, I don't know how do you measure risk? We don't know that, but that's something that we have to kind of explore. It's not about because we know that the young people that are stabbing each other are young black people predominantly, and we know that. So if we're basing it on looking for knives, then we're basically looking for specific demographic. However, if we change that focus, we can start to diversify who we actually stop and search.
I'll now give each of our panelists a maximum of 30 seconds to leave one more idea in the minds of the House before we have our vote on the motion. And I think we might just start
again. Okay. I seem to be getting favouritism here, so
each have equal time.
Well, I've only got 30 seconds.
It's gone.
I'm just going to repeat what I just said. I've been out police. I've been doing it for years and years and years. And people come to me all the time saying they got stopped and it was this and it was that, and I say let's go and challenge it, and they say they can't be bothered because if they do, they'll be targeted. Yes, it used to happen. Let's accept that it used to happen. It may do, it may still happen. But what I know is when I find out about it, it stops. Because I make sure it stops. But I can't do it by myself. I can't go to all the different boroughs around London and help everybody. We all need to help ourselves. And the way we help ourselves is by getting involved. By joining the local stop and search monitoring groups. You don't need money. It's not about money. It's about ensuring that those who police us do it properly. So I said, if you will like me, then please, throw that motion away. Because it's not progressive. We need to be moving forward, not backwards. Thank you.
I've actually been out on stop and search in Hackney before, and from what I saw, they didn't actually actually stop one black male, maybe because I was there. So my thing is, we need to kind of stop focusing on all of these sort of behaviours of the police in our eyes. Of course, if we're judging them from how we look at them, of course they're going to change how they behave. Let's get these cameras. Let's start changing the way that we see stop and search and start kind of conducting it properly. Let's talk to these young people. Let's interact with them and give them reasons why they're stopping and searching them, and then maybe we can weigh up whether, you know, stop and search can do more good than harm.
Well, I was going to say something here, I'm not. There's been some really eloquent debates at both ends of the table. Dwayne refers to the obvious. You can't prove a negative. I said 64 firearms in 3 months. Actually, 64 firearms in 3 months is what? 252? If you work it out, I mean, I've got no figures. I haven't got a year's figures. But that's a large number of firearms. You've got a choice. It's really simple. You can believe Mr. Griffiths that none of those trials benefited from that. But actually, you can also choose to believe me that for every single one of those guns that's out there, there was a potentially further matter for Mr. Griffiths to defend.
Well, since you've chosen to personalise it, let me give you a startling example of the ineffectiveness of stop and search. A couple of years ago, a 5-year-old girl was shot in a greengrocer's, a convenience store in Stockwell. 3 young black men were put on trial for that shooting. I defended one of them. Now, each of those 3 black men, in the 6 months or so preceding that shooting, had been stopped and searched on the Myatsfield estate at least half a dozen times each. And on none of those occasions was anything discovered. Why do I know those statistics? Because the only use that was made of the number of stops and search in the case was to show association between the defendants. So it was being used in effect as a form of surveillance as opposed to crime detection. And it did not prevent the shooting of that little girl and her being paralyzed. That just shows how ineffective it was. Because these 3 had been identified as gang members on the Myatsfield estate. That's why they were receiving so much attention. And yet, what did it actually manage to do at the end of the day?
Thank you very much.
I've been out on quite a few stop and search operations with the police, and I can assure you an awful lot of young black men were stopped. And on one occasion, they even stopped a car full of black people who proved to be on their way to a church meeting. They were all carrying Bibles, and there were an awful lot of apologies to be given. One of the long-term effects of stop and search is that it criminalises a lot of people. And those people then find it more difficult to get jobs. They end up doing more crime because those are the circles that they mix in. And then our prison population, I mean, at the moment, is over 80,000 people, and it's bursting at the seams. We have violence and huge problems in the prison system. This is a sort of continuous line between very low-level crimes of carrying small amounts of drugs, getting a criminal record, not being able to get out of that. I would say that stop and search is so damaged, it is not fit for use.
Well, stand up and rise to Dwayne's challenges. I used to be an advisor to Trident, independent advisory group. I did it for 7 years. And I know a lot of the things that they do are actually called disruption tactics. They know that there's nothing there. They know that the kids are going to outsmart them. They know they're not going to get anything, but they do it to disrupt. And then they get people arrested and charged on all of these knock-on offences. But let's get behind this. Let's get behind all this stuff. When I used to be on Trident, I used to talk to them and say, why can't we go and talk to the Home Office? Actually, we got the Home Office in the room once. And say, why can't we stop the production of guns like Broadcocks, the guns that these kids rebore and use out on the streets? And they said to us, no, we can't do it because there's a cost. Someone would have to pay the manufacturers, and we can't do that. But when somebody let off shots in Dunblane, they were able to take out lawful guns out of everybody's hands and give them compensation. So where there's a will, there's a way. We don't make guns. We don't create jobs. We don't come from the countries where they make the cocaine and the heroin. Why aren't they doing more to stop these things at source? Why aren't they putting the resources into that instead of using those things as excuses to come and harass and abuse my community? And that's not old school, that's new school. Why aren't you doing it today? You're able to use detectors to find human breath in vans, but you can't use detectors to stop the guns from coming into the countries on the same routes. Why don't you stop messing about, reprioritize what you're doing? When you say that the community wants to feel safe, the community wants to be heard. If you spoke to my community, that's what we would beg you to do, and that's what we'd support you to do if you're trying to stop these things from coming into our community in the first place.
Friends, the time has come to give the judgment of the House on the motion. We've heard such compelling arguments on each side. It's really a matter of fundamental justice for this community. Perhaps we could pause just for 5 seconds to think for ourselves. Which way we're going to vote. The motion is, this House believes that the police power to stop and search does more harm than good. I'll now ask for hands in the affirmative. This House believes that the police power to stop and search does more harm than good, and then hands in the negative. All those in the affirmative?
Can we vote? All right.
Oh, yeah. And in the negative?
Disappointed.
File out. I just want to say that thank you very much indeed for coming this evening. The £5 that you have donated to this event, well, I think most people have donated, supports an organisation called StopWatch, which does precisely what I think almost every speaker on the panel spoke about, which is to monitor the police power to stop and search, to do research, and to take action to ensure that it is used where it is used, that it's used properly. Do you want to say anything?
Yeah. Hi, some of you know me. I'm on the Bar Society, and I just wanted to say thank you on behalf of us, the Bar Society, as well as the School of Law, as well as StopWatch. Thank you all for coming, but also thank you for sharing this, and thank you for coming to speak. As you've probably all gathered, these people are very, very busy, and they've taken their Friday evening to come and hang out with you guys and answer your questions. So, yeah, can we just give them one more